kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. The parable points out how the smallest of seeds grows into the largest of plants. It seems straightforward, but is there more to it? Welcome to Word for the Week, Season 3, Episode 5, where we discuss the mustard seed and the backstory that brings a whole new level of meaning to the parable. Matthew 13, 31 and 32. He put another parable before them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It's the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. You know, for a straightforward illustration, this one's confusing because technically the mustard seed isn't the smaller seed and mustard plants don't grow into trees. So if the facts of the parable are wrong, can the principles be right?
If the facts are wrong, can the parable be right? Yes. Really, really good question. And of course, some of this stuff is what gets used as an argument against Christianity. And it is true, though, that the parable is deceptively confusing. For a start, there are at least 4 major categories of mustard plants. Furthermore, the ones called shrubs are technically flowering plants, and the ones called trees are technically shrubs. So the more we dig into it, it seems the more confusing it becomes. But we'll find out it's only that way at first.
Okay, so let's start unraveling the mystery by pointing out the main species you were talking about.
Okay.
I'm going to leave you to pronounce the Latin names.
Oh, sure.
First, we have the 3 species we use in condiments. The first one is white mustard.
Synapsis alba.
All right. This has light yellow round seeds, only about 0.1 inches in diameter.
And just to correct myself before I go on, it combined the word, it's Synapsis alba, not synapsis. That would mean it's smart mustard. It's white mustard. It's Synapsis.
Smart white mustard. Okay. The second one, the black mustard,
is Brassica nigra.
Okay. And it has tiny, hard, globular seeds that are spicier in flavor. I'd probably like that one.
Yeah, well, you probably eat it all the time without even realizing the two.
And number 3, the brown mustard.
Brassica juncae. Brassica juncae.
Yeah, I know it's pronounced way different than it
like
looks.
More of an Asian word there.
And that kind is hard round seeds that are a darker yellow with less taste to them.
Right.
So these plants grow anywhere from 3 to 12 feet tall, depending on the environment.
Right. And now you've just covered the 3 domesticated mustard plants that there are. There is one now that is actually considered, and it's called a tree. Very likely the one people feel Jesus might have been talking about. Good fit, Salvadora persica, and named after because it's thought to originate in Persia or Iran. And this here is actually something that grows 25 feet tall, has a very deep root system that hunts out water. It produces a lot of branches, and so it grows as wide as it does tall, a lot like us in older age. We grow as wide as we are tall. So for the herbiculturist, that actually classifies it not as a tree, but as a shrub. So 25 feet tall, 25 feet wide with these long-reaching branches.
I'm sure we could go through the unique features of each species, but let's look into some interesting facts about mustard plants in general.
Oh yeah, let's stay in general. There's so much to be said. And let's start with this. Do you know that the mustard plant was used for medicine long before it was used as a food?
I did know, and it's because I watch so much BBC dramas.
And I'll testify to that. You definitely do watch lots of BBC dramas. And maybe on BBC dramas, they've come up with these other things too. The first recorded use of the plant, and probably wild mustard at the time, 3,000 years BC, in the Mesopotamian Valley, I would believe is where it was. Then along come the Romans and the Greeks, and they start using mustard as a cure for toothaches, as a remedy for blood circulation. What's more, the mustard tree is also called the toothbrush tree, and I think you said you knew this as well, because for hundreds of years people had been breaking off sticks of the tree, peel the bark, and chew on the fiber because they found, in their own way, I don't think they describe it this way in their day, but the fiber has an antibacterial property that is really good for mouth or dental health, for your dental health. And as a matter of fact, it's so good that compounds from this are used in toothpaste to this very day. Ask
That
Mr. Crest.
I did not know. It seems ancient people put a lot of stock in mustard plants.
We're going to let that one slide.
Well, I never get to do those, but are there any other medicinal properties that are scientifically proven in our day, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, even beyond the things they knew, if you take all the plants, so just kind of lumping it together, the seeds, the leaves, the pods, the fiber within the plant, there's vitamins B, C, K, and A found throughout those things. Selenium, calcium, phosphorus, copper, and magnesium, all are trace elements. But here comes my pièce de résistance.
Okay.
It's me who gets to talk French today. The mustard plant contains two significant antioxidants that have been known to help in preventing cancer, bacterial infection, inflammation, fungal infection, arthritis, asthma, and hypertension. So we should all live on mustard plants.
Well, mustard certainly sounds like a super plant, but they aren't necessarily tasty for just eating by itself, I don't think.
Yeah, you mean outside of the condiments.
Right.
Yeah, because they are great on hot dogs. Well, it's interesting you say that because especially I know dealing with the thing that's a tree that's technically a shrub, the leaves are used by animals in those arid regions as a main source of water. People also eat them. They use the pods, the flowers, the seeds, the tender leaves in salads, and a lot of it you can fry parts of it and use it like a fried food.
Wow.
So apparently fairly tasty for the people of the day.
And as we look at these properties of the mustard plant, it makes me think of Revelation, in Revelation 22, 1 and 2. And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and of the Lamb. In the middle of its street, on either side of the river, was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations.
You know, and what's really cool, there you read in the end of the New Testament, but what it does is echo back to the Old Testament, almost a quote from Ezekiel's vision. How about reading that for us?
47:12. Along the bank of the river, on this side and that, will grow all kinds of trees used for food. Their leaves will not wither, and their fruit will not fail. They will bear fruit every month, because their water flows from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be for food, and their leaves for medicine. Wow, so as Jesus talked about the mustard seed, all of this must have been in the minds of his listeners. So what other things do we know about the mustard plant?
Right. And of course, they might not have been thinking of Revelation at the time, but even when Revelation was finally written, it echoed back to something they knew intimately.
Right.
Other interesting things, very interesting, is undoubtedly, you know, a lot of this stuff known to the Jewish farmers of the time. And they were dealing with, at the time, it gets almost confusing because there's a number of things mentioned in this way. They dealt with domesticated wild mustard, which they intentionally grew. They'd have fields of it. And it says they also dealt with with domestic and then wild plants. But teaching said the two couldn't be mixed because they considered them two different plants, and it was that whole rabbinical thing about mixing seed.
Oh, yeah.
And to get the seeds to grow, something that you, if you get instructions, if you decide today you want to in our environment want to grow a mustard plant. To get it to start growing, what is recommended, you take the seeds, you soak them in lukewarm water, and you do that for 3 days. And because they're so small, then when you rinse them off, you have to rinse them in a fine cheesecloth.
Really fine.
So you don't lose your seeds. And then the soil in which you are going to germinate your seeds needs to be, and I would take it, this would be a heating pad used on a small pot, as you're germinating. Needs to be heated to mid 80s to mid 90s degree Fahrenheit in doing this.
Wow. So why the meticulous soak and rinse? I know even today, like there's some seeds like alfalfa and mung beans. I used to soak them because they have a really hard shell to get through. So just to cook them, you had to soak them first.
Right, and I imagine some of this goes on other seeds as well. But the reason you're rinsing off the pulp, right? Mm-hmm. And it's because the pulp that was coating the seed shell contained germination inhibitors. In other words, something to keep it from germinating. And that had to be completely removed before you could get your seeds to germinate.
Well, so in the wild, growing in desert places, the
Right.
seeds have this chemical coating. It keeps them from sprouting until they have the right conditions, to the right amount of water and the right amount of heat.
Right.
And the right amount of sun. That's really amazing.
Well, it is, because when you think of it, if you're dealing in a desert type environment, sun is a big factor, as in it can be a killer. On the other hand, the lack of water is also a big deal. So, and that can be a killer. So the mustard seed has built into it, or at least coat it with this thing that doesn't allow it to germinate until just the right time.
Wow. And that sounds like another well-known verse in Romans 5:6. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly.
Yeah, so all of that so far in just the seeds.
Wow. So anything else in mustard plants?
Probably tons and tons.
Probably.
But just not to go too long on it, we'll share two last things.
Okay.
The mustard plant, of course, being, like we say, a Middle Eastern origin and plant, has water-seeking roots, and that would be the technical way we'd say it today. It has water-seeking roots.
Well, it makes sense since it lives in a land where water is scarce.
Right.
So that would be the top priority.
Right, isn't that? There's a lesson for you. It says even a plant knows its top priority.
Yeah.
The first priority is to put down roots. Boy, we could learn from that, couldn't we?
Yes.
So what it means is it'll put them down deep and it'll put them down fast. And the roots have this way, they're water hunters. It's going to search for water. And roots been known to sprout out 5 feet when they sense, in a matter of days, when they sense water. And in fact, they're so aggressive in their water hunting that you can ask any gardener today and they'll tell you, if you want to grow these plants, don't ever put them near a water line. And of course, you can see what would happen. And just a small crack in your water line, that either outgoing or incoming, just a small crack where there's water to be sensed, and these roots will be on it like crazy, and they've been known to tear into pipes. So do not put them near a water line, but you can grow them in the desert. So,
Wow. Okay, so growing deep roots first, that's certainly biblical principle. Then what's the second thing?
well, the second thing we were looking at, we know this already about the seeds, that they're very small and that they're food, for certain animals.
Right.
So they have 2 ways that they very quickly spread. The birds live in the trees. They'll live in the shrubs, whatever. They'll eat the seeds. So they're going to spread through birds.
Right.
And then since they're so small, well, let me just say, even when you think of that, is that essentially we have birds, they live in the trees, they eat the seeds, and now the trees are living in the birds.
Yeah,
biblical.
and in that sense, seeds would be scattered all over the place in their dropping.
Yep, they'd be planting them on your cars,
Yeah.
everything else. Yeah, they
Yep.
plant through their droppings. So that's one way they spread. Birds go everywhere. The second thing is, since they're so small, they travel on the slightest breeze. So they spread for miles just by themselves on a breeze. So the way it resonates with Scripture in the parable is this, that in the features is that this mustard plant is designed to spread.
Wow, and that's another biblical principle, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, if we look at the book, and this is kind of interesting on how it all fits together. In the book of Acts, we know that's where we learn the beginning of the church. Then you have the great persecution that breaks out. All the Jewish Christians are scattered everywhere, and they take the seeds of the faith with them. They become the seeds of the faith, and they're scattered all over the Roman Empire.
So it's not out of the question to see this parable with prophetic overtones.
Right. I mean, just like, we read in Acts, the Apostle Paul, who was Saul, was involved in that. And the term that was used from the time of Paul on was the word diaspora. And it's actually a Greek compound word. It's two words in the Greek, and it means dia, meaning to over or through something. And then spioro, which means to scatter or to sow seeds. So literally, just like the mustard plant, the church was spread through the scattering of seeds. Spread through seeds, that's what the word means. So.
Well, that's pretty cool. And I think...
And like you say, so there is that prophetic tone that's in there, at least, if not overtly, at least by implication. So Acts records literally what the mustard plant is. It was something that spread from, the kingdom of heaven come to earth and scattered its seeds. So.
Okay, so far we've answered the first part of my original question.
Right.
Jesus wasn't wrong in calling the mustard plant a tree. It's a small plant, a shrub, and a tree in the culture and time.
Yeah, and that's a great thing. We always say this, like we said last week ad nauseum, who's speaking, who are they speaking to, what's the context?
Right.
And in the context of his listeners, saying this plant is a tree would have been perfectly understood. Even better than understanding, it would have resonated with them.
So from all we've covered, mustard is quite a plant. So did those ancient farmers see it as a precious commodity?
From everything we said so far, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But the real answer is not really. In the Middle East, I think they must have a love-hate relationship with this plant because, like we said, there's all these wonderful things about it. But it's considered pretty much a weed. Well, it is a weed because it will grow everywhere and anywhere in the Middle East, whether you like it or not. So a nuisance plant. As a matter of fact, there are rabbinical teachings that actually forbade the cultivation of mustard plants, period. Because everybody knew if you let these things take root, it was near impossible, especially with the technology of the day, near impossible to get rid of them. They were just that tenacious.
So the ancient mind had some very strong opinions for and against the plant, much like people are with God to this day.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah. So let's go back to the second part of the question, and I'll tell you why. Okay. This is a favorite point of naysayers. We kind of mentioned that earlier, but technically the mustard seed isn't the smallest seed in the world.
No.
For example, the orchid seed is no bigger than a speck of dust, and even if we simply compare the ratio of seed size to the grown plant, the eucalyptus tree has the same size as a mustard plant, but produces a much larger tree. So no matter how we look at it, the statement is technically wrong.
Technically wrong.
Were the naysayers right?
Once again, we have to consider who Jesus is talking to in the context of it. And the context is he was talking to ancient Jewish farmers, not modern day, globally tuned in horticulturists. So if you were to bring up orchids from the Amazon or eucalyptus from the from Australia, I mean, they'd have no idea what you're talking about. And that doesn't fit in their life experience at all.
Right.
So why would he bring up such a thing in his teaching, right? Jesus was speaking and teaching in terms to which they could relate. That's the purpose of a parable.
Right.
And plus the fact that a good parable speaks from the point of view of life experience, it also speaks in another way from the cultural symbolism in the language of the listeners as well.
Okay, so explain that to us.
Okay, in Jewish culture, the mustard seed, or to say as small as a mustard seed, wasn't simply talking about a seed. It was actually a reference of measurement.
How is something so small a practical means of measurement? You'd think it would just be...
Right. I mean, how do you measure with a mustard seed, right?
Yeah.
But that was the point, is that it was something impossibly small to measure, so it was as small as a mustard seed. And we find that this even found its way into the religious practices of the time. Two simple examples: the Jewish law, the Mishnah, the oral Torah, discusses the purity of kitchen utensils. How clean did your kitchen have to be? So, in the day they worked from kneading troughs to make their dough. Sometimes they would use eggs, to mix in, which was, if allowed to sit, was putrefying. There we go. There's a way to turn that into a noun, but I'm not even going to try. But it would be considered impure.
Right.
So it was
Because it would make everything else made after that
impure. But
Right.
And so in that fact, the utensil itself was considered impure. So they made their dough in a kneading trough. So they said, how much is too much of this bad dough left in the trough? And they said, and the Mishnah stated that if there was a piece as small as a mustard seed, it was unacceptable. So that's how clean it had to be. Something a little more earthy or biological dealt with ritual cleanliness for women in menstruation, because that was a big thing in Jewish ceremonial law. And the Babylonian Talmud said that should a woman have a drop of blood the size of a mustard seed, that was still considered impure in the season. They had to refrain from any sexual relations until it stopped, and they had to wait 7 days until it disappeared. So the idea, the expression that something can be no smaller than a mustard seed was just embedded in the Jewish culture. So he spoke in terms of the culture, right down to a reference of measurement.
Wow. So if I put all this together, which there's a lot,
Okay.
from the most insignificant seed, there's an unstoppable growth of a plant that's a giver of life and an unwanted weed at the same time. It's something that defies description, since it's a plant, shrub, and a tree, and yet it's wrongly labeled in all these ways. Even as it faithfully remains mustard, it adapts to all environments.
Yeah.
It's a pest to one creature and the very means of life to another. And its leaves are the healing of many and a nuisance to others. So that's what the kingdom of heaven is like.
Right. And of course, you're covering the context. This is how the people would have saw the item. And as we talk context today, like we say, we look into application on Sunday follow-up. But that's a pretty good grasp. And here we are, you've investigated a 2-sentence parable, and it's this loaded with information. It's surprising how things just become rich when we understand the background from which they're coming. So.
It really is amazing. The kingdom of heaven is like an unwanted weed that gives life.
Yeah. The kingdom of heaven is like a field of dandelions. It sounds like something Forrest Gump would say, but Jesus beat him to the profundity of it all.
Well, And from there, we're going to move on from mustard to music.
Yes.
And we've already featured the song with our Canaan kids. It's posted all by itself on Facebook and YouTube. So here's another song from last Sunday's worship, a wonderful song of invitation by David Crowder, Come As You Are. So until next week, be blessed, and we'll see you.
Come out of sadness from wherever you've been. Come broken hearted, let rescue begin. Come find your mercy, O sinner, come kneel. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame. All who are broken, lift up your face. Oh, wanderer, come home, you're not too far. So lay down your hurt, lay down your heart, come as you are, come as you are. There's hope for the hopeless and all those who stray. Come sit at the table, come taste the grace. There's rest for the weary, rest that endures. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't cure. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't cure. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame. All who are broken, lift up your face. Oh, wanderer, come home, you're not too far. So lay down your hurt, lay down your heart, come as you are, come as you are. There's joy for the morning, oh sinner, be still. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame. All who are broken, lift up your face. Oh, wanderer, come home, you're not too far. So lay down your hurt, lay down your heart, come as you are, come as you are, come as you are.
You can watch Word for the Week at canancommunity.org. You can also catch our live stream on Canaan Community's Facebook, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app.